behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Welcome to the GTM pod. Thank you, as always, for hanging out with us. This is going to be a fun one. I get to catch up with someone who I haven't talked to in a long time. So some of these sessions are just me hanging out with a great founder, friend, and catching up. And we just happen to hit record on these. So it'll be a fun conversation. And hopefully you leave with some inspiration, some stories, and some tactical advice to help you scale your company. I am joined by Mel Fellay. Mel, welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here too. And yeah, I think I joined one of the first GTM podcasts like 18 months ago. So excited to be back.
Absolutely. We're pumped to have you back. And the podcast has grown a lot since then. So it's been really cool. And yeah, there's so much I want to dive into with you. But before we get into it, and I'll run through a bio for the listeners. How have you been? How's the summer going?
I've been good. I feel like, everyone right now is operating under difficult conditions in an environment, but it feels like we're getting our footing. And, for me as a CEO, that allows me to really kind of get out of working in the business into on the business. And that's really where I love spending my time and really thinking through strategy and innovation and markets. And actually was able to take the week off last week. Which I think is important for all of us to be able to take a little bit of time off. I ended up hurting my foot, so not ideal, but it still is a great way to kind of just reset before the second half this year.
Yeah, so incredibly important, and even more so as a leader, right? You have all of these people now looking to you. So if you don't set the precedent of, hey, it's okay to take time off, you need to take time off, take care of your mental health, your physical health. It all stems from the top. Do you feel that pressure sometimes that people are looking to you as the example?
100%. And honestly, I'm very self-aware that I'm a complete workaholic. I joke in all aspects of my life, I'm very all-in person. And so it's easy for me to just keep going and not stop. And I get energized and joy from solving problems. And so it's easy to just keep going. But sometimes you realize that when you take a step back, you're able to see problems on a whole different level. And I found that every time I've taken, 4 or 5 days, I remember 3 years back or so, I took my first proper 5-day road trip. And I actually went on a solo road trip through Utah and Colorado. So I had a lot of thinking space and came back and I'm like, we need to kill our freemium product. It was just every indication, all the data, all the waste was clearly not productive for our go-to-market. But when you're in the business, it's easy to kind of trick your mind into thinking, this number went up slightly this week, so maybe it is working. But when you take a step back and you're able to really look at the problem from a whole new lens, it just is always really helpful. And that was really my goal with this week, right? I always spend about half the week really just trying to decompress and enjoy time with my partner. But then the other half, I was more kind of using that as reflection time on the business, and being able to share those learnings with the team and being able to share the fun things I did on my vacation too, with the team to encourage them that, I want to attract people that love what they do, that love solving hard problems, that love working hard, but that also recognize that, if you want to work hard, you need to put some play in there and allow your mind to rest and feel re-energized. So
absolutely. So incredibly important. I spent some time in Bali recently, just hanging out, solo tripping around and doing a lot of thinking, and came back insanely refreshed. And it's also just so gratifying to come back and be like, wow, I've built a life and a business that I'm really pumped to get back to.
100%. You need those moments to really appreciate, and also, especially when times are more difficult, to realize how special of an opportunity it is that you get to do what you do every day and put your, life's work into it. So I completely agree. And on the solo trip piece, that's something I haven't prioritized enough recently, but I listened to a podcast. I'm blanking on, it was, I'm blanking on his name, the guy from 20 VC who interviews
Harry Stebbings.
Harry Stebbings, yeah. He interviewed Scott something. He's Justin Bieber's, he was like the guy that discovered Justin Bieber. Did you listen to that episode?
I haven't, but I know who you're referencing, yeah.
You have to listen to it. And anyone that, he had such great life lessons in it, but he talked about like his number one piece of life advice is the importance of taking 1 week a year for yourself to do something solo, like to reset your mind, to refocus your priorities, to realign your goals. And so it's inspired me to try and carve out time at some point in the next 9 months or so to find that. So I'm glad that you got time to do that.
Yeah. So important. Realign, rediscover. And also it's when you're solo, you're also forced to meet new people and you interact with them. And it's the people that have known you for a long time. They're kind of like a mirror, right? But they know all of this about you versus like people you just meet. They just see you for like the evolution of where you're at right there. And it's this really interesting feeling of you can kind of see it like, oh, like I'm just, Scott the human, not Scott with like at GTM fund and all this stuff. And
100%.
I love it. All right. So I guess I got to do a bio before we keep rolling. You're always super easy to talk to, so we can get rocking. But so Mel is the CEO and founder of Spekit. Spekit is a just-in-time platform that is really transforming how we learn at work. Definitely urge everyone to check it out. And what Spekit does is it meets reps with the process guidance, enablement, and knowledge they need right when they need it in their natural workflow to help them be more efficient, drive more revenue, and eliminate all that friction of change. As leaders, if we're listening to this, we all know how difficult it is to drive any sort of change throughout an organization. And Spekit's going to enable you to do that in an easier way, which is what we all want. Personally, she's also a Forbes 30 under 30 recipient. So congrats on that. A top 100 female entrepreneur to watch. Been featured across Forbes, Entrepreneur, Fast Company, Business Insider, all the most incredible syndication platforms, and co-founded Spekit with Zari, and it's literally used now by like all the big players. So Uber Freight, Snowflake, Southwest Airlines, Invesco, and has raised, I think it's 60 million now.
Yeah, 60 million over the last few years.
Wow. By very notable investors. I'll throw GTM fund in there, but
Of course.
Operator Collective, Bonfire, Foundry, Renegade, Matchstick, incredible investors, incredible backers. You built such an amazing team, and it's just been really cool to watch the growth. So congrats on everything. Is there anything I missed there?
No, I think you got the marketing blurb. It's funny. I feel like the Forbes under 30, the entrepreneur with recent media, I think sometimes it's better to skip those, but the marketing team slips those in. But anyway, no, I think you also did a great recap of what Spekit does. So thank you for that.
Of course. Okay. So what I want to dive into, and it's a problem that I think a lot of companies are experiencing right now, as I think it's a bit of a byproduct of like AI, and there's a lot of new entrants in different categories coming up. And when I look at Spekit, you kind of play in the middle of a few different categories, and you're kind of disrupting a few of them that have some larger incumbents. How has that kind of affected your go-to-market playbook? I imagine it does force you to really like level up and sometimes battle on multiple fronts.
Great question. So just taking a step back for listeners that aren't quite as familiar with Spekit, ultimately, I started Spekit really driven by my own experience working at a high growth technology company. I was overseeing a mix of operations, go-to-market teams, and ultimately was kind of handed the responsibility of managing our failed Salesforce implementation and kind of all of our internal tools. And we had all the common challenges that every startup has, right? How do we get new hires ramped quickly? We've got documentation in all these different places. Our sales playbook was this like 50-page doc that was updated sparingly. And then we were always struggling with how do we communicate those changes to the team? And Our business was launching new products and initiatives. And so change was constant. It was a huge pain. And like, we were just feeling all the consequences of that, right? Bringing on new people that weren't producing. I was spending hours with our exec team preparing for board meetings because our forecasts were all off, because our data in Salesforce wasn't reliable. It was hard to figure out what was working, what was not in the business. There was a lot of just general frustration because there was lots of noise and Slack and email, and just like, it just felt like there was just a general inefficiency. And I was like, I just wish we could solve for making sure that people knew what they needed to know to do their jobs, like at the most simplest of forms. And long story short, I was tasked with solving that problem ultimately for the company in my role of kind of biz ops / chief of staff. And I didn't have a background in enablement. I didn't have a background in learning design. For context, I started the company when I was 25. So my career prior to that was, somewhat limited. And so I went into, looking for a solution eyes wide open. And doing a few Google queries, like how do we solve for training and knowledge and adoption, tool processes, change management? I ended up doing basically 30 different demos of different categories of tools. And they were really across 4 different categories of software. The first one was what you call digital adoption platforms. Those are tools that are really designed to help you learn how to navigate the UIs of technology, really. And I found those tools really interesting as we thought about our technology challenge, right? We were constantly making changes to Salesforce, and people never knew where they need to go and what they needed to do. But most of the tools on the market at that point were very technology heavy, meaning that I'd need developers and all these resources to make them happen. I was like, okay, this solves a sliver of my problem, but it's going to take a lot of work. Then I looked at knowledge management solutions, right? Most of these were destinations, with some few exceptions like Guru, that I think is a phenomenal tool that allowed you to search for information and kind of like your objection handling and things like that in the flow somewhat. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. But I wish I could kind of get a hybrid of these different tools. And then I was like, but even with these, I still can't confirm people have done the work. I can't assess. I'm still somewhat in the dark. And that brought me down the route of LMS platforms. And I'm like, okay, I get the value of being able to assess and assign, but who's going to have the time to create all these long courses? Our business was just changing way too fast for us to be able to create courses. And I know enough about human psychology, and now I've become obsessed with researching everything about learning, but like, people just don't like their LMSs. And I found that market had over 800 platforms, yet there's no company ever that's like, we love our LMS. Like, I have yet to hear a rep say how much they love their learning platform, right? So I was like, okay, but I like the ability to like assess and assign. And then there were content management platforms, right? That were all about like, hey, you've got these resources that marketing's creating, and you've got these resources that you want to send in the buying cycle, but they're not as successful. And I'm like, hold up. Taking a step back, you're telling me that if I want to solve this simple problem of knowledge and training and content, which is at the end of the day, it's just information to do your jobs, I now need to buy 4 different tools that are not integrated, by the way. So it's like content in 4 different places. When we can't even keep the content we have, then we're still going to have Google Drive and Slack. And I'm like, this is just insane. And I started just talking to people. And every time I brought up the subject, everyone was like, yeah, it's a huge pain point. And so I took a step back and I was like, okay, what all these platforms have in common is content. It's content. What if we could take inspiration from what's really valuable, that top 20, 30% of features that is really unique and valuable to those different platforms, because all of them have a lot of common, right? You can search, you can organize, you can version control. Like, you've got kind of like every content tools has that. And then it just felt like these platforms had like 30% of features that were kind of like unique. And I'm like, I see a future where if there was one platform that allowed you to repurpose and reuse content, the same content that you use during onboarding, you could, for let's say a case study or something similar, you could then walk someone through if you're trying to train someone on like selling to a CRO. It's like, hey, here's what you need to know about CROs. Here's a case study of us selling to a CRO. Here's a 1-pager you can send them. And that was repurposed both for onboarding as well as in the buying cycle, et cetera. And so I saw a room to ultimately an opportunity to consolidate. Now the question is, how do you go to market around that? And in looking at the space, the problem I felt the most intimately was this one around technology. adoption and change management and process. Probably driven by my background in biz ops and being responsible for our data and forecasting at the company and never being able to get the right answers because everyone on our team had their own definition of our stages and amounts and close dates. And so in looking at that space, I was like, okay, first I want to solve that problem because we were at a time, I think 6 years ago where tech was massively getting adopted in companies, right? That was like really the mass proliferation of SaaS started around that time where companies were buying tons of tools and the problem was only getting bigger. And so that's really where we focus our energy. Now, from a go-to-market, I went more narrow. I was like, the one place that makes sense to start was Salesforce, right? Largest CRM platform, hundreds of thousands of companies use it. Every company struggles with those challenges. And so I really started there, and I wanted to remove a lot of the manual effort and have a very differentiated position in the market. And so we built a really one-of-a-kind, still to this day, integration that allows you to track changes that you're making to Salesforce. Like, our stages were renamed, which is what everyone's doing right now, redoing their stages, redoing their sales process. How can you kind of track those changes so that your documentation stays up to date? And so, really went to market super narrow, focused on the problem of Salesforce adoption. And for the first few years, that kind of like slowly got us off the ground. And that's when we really started taking off at the beginning of 2021 when everyone went remote, right? Because now every company that was about to launch a major transformation, right, was going to be struggling. Now, what was interesting is my co-founder and I, when we started the company, we're both of the same opinion that like, hey, tech is being sold to by every other company under the sun. Let's focus on all these other organizations that are not being sold to, right? If you know anything about Salesforce, their .org arm, for example, which is their nonprofit and education arm, that one's massive. So like, who's selling to those organizations and helping them through these transformations? Selling to like more traditional enterprises, right? Financial institutions that were like Salesforce, investing in Salesforce was like the biggest investment they were making in their like last 10 years and going to really be a catalyst for their step into innovation. And so we really started selling to this underserved section of the market that no one was selling to. And that really got us off the ground. But when 2021 came and everyone went, 2020, excuse me, pandemic, already 3 years ago, when everyone went remote during the pandemic and everyone was focused on like, how do we make people efficient remote? And then the huge great resignation started and everyone started hiring. All of a sudden, like every company under the sun, particularly in tech, was trying to hire like crazy. And so that's when we really, looking back, probably grasped on that opportunity a little bit more excitedly than we should have, given the environment right now. And we really shifted all of our go-to-market to tech, to selling into tech companies, because that's where we were seeing so much demand and natural fit. And then we started going really broad with our messaging. And that's really where we made some mistakes, right? Just using the word enablement just opens a can of worms because there are so many other platforms out there that use it. And so, looking back, I think that's where we felt a bit of the pains of that over the last year, which was we sold to a lot of tech companies that were hiring like crazy, but that didn't necessarily have the resources they needed to really make sense of the 5 different platforms that they bought at the time. And so we went really, really wide. And long story short, at the end of last year, I took a step back. I was looking at our data. I was looking at our healthy customers, our unhealthy customers. I was looking at the market and I'm like, pause. We've gone too wide. Our close rates had dropped because we were competing, against LMSs when we're not an LMS. We don't have all the capabilities of event integrations and stuff. And so we just got frankly distracted from a go-to-market and went really wide. And so at the beginning of this year, I really refocused. I'm like, okay. And there's another piece here, which is the product readiness, which we can speak to a little bit more. But we took a step back and we went back to our roots. We were like, okay, before we intentionally expand, let's go back to where we can do things the right way, where we can serve those customers. Let's refocus our ICP, our go-to-market, and then intentionally start expanding across different personas and industries when we're ready to. So that's kind of like the high level. And from a product standpoint, we really focused first on kind of the 2 markets that best fit that adoption problem, which was more on the kind of knowledge and data industry.
Great breakdown. So what I'm kind of like hearing is, what worked was when you sort of narrowed the playing field and really focused on one ICP, one problem at a time. Although you can do multiple things, you really hone in on that. focus all the messaging, go where people aren't. I think it's easy to get caught up on like, oh, there's this trend happening. Like, let's jump on this trend. There's 1 million people in tech getting onboarded. Like, let's go solve that. Whereas, you mentioned going after like .org. No one is playing there. There's also so many non-sexy industries that so much SaaS players don't look at. There's like financial services, insurance, some of these like that are really like greenfield. So that sounds like something that both work for you, and then listening to that market pull, but then not getting too over your skis in that market pull, because it can pull you and almost misguide you into putting too many resources in it, and then you're spread too thin and forced to kind of battle it out in multiple sections.
Yeah. And I think the biggest case is it's okay, I think, to solve different problems and to go wide, and we will eventually be going back to market, but you need to have a very intentional strategy around it, right? It's here's specifically how we solve these use cases, not here's our product, it can do all these things, so we're going to talk to all these people. And that's what we did the first time we went to market around that. And that's where I think the struggle came, versus now as we think about our go-to-market in the future, it's like, okay, here are the very specific ways that Spekit solves these problems. And so let's build our go-to-market, our demo flows, our CS motions around these specific use cases and personas and how we expand. And so I think you can go wider than just a very, very narrow ICP focus, but it needs to be very intentional in how you do that. And that was what was lacking when we kind of went too broad too fast and got caught up in the massive amount of scaling and demand that was happening. And just one more note on the .org piece, since you brought it up again, it's always great to know that you're having an impact on any organization. But I can tell you, especially when times are difficult, getting on the phone with your customers, like for us, the CDC Foundation, the National Network of Abortions, the Children's Cancer Institute in Australia, the ALS Association, for these organizations, like hearing the kind of impact you can have on them, because they don't have all the tools, right? They have like Salesforce and the kind of impact, because we are able to solve a lot of different use cases, right? We might go in narrowly focused on Salesforce adoption, but once they realize the power, they expand. It's a very real impact we're having on their team. And that's just something that, I think helps you as a founder go back to like why you're doing things, right? Being able to hear those stories and those impacts. And it's not to say you can't hear that across any company, but there's just something special about nonprofits when you can't have that impact. So just for what it's worth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I imagine that would be incredibly gratifying and fill up your cup, particularly on those tough days. It's like we're creating technology that not only improves business outcomes, but these are also like improving lives, like in the real world, which is really cool, which is technology at its best, I think. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and get to kind of story time. I know you had a bit of a crazy summer last summer, so I want to take you in a time machine and transport you back to that. I'm sure it was a hectic time, so we don't have to stay there too long. Don't worry, we'll get you back. But yeah, you basically stepped in as CTO, which to me sounds absolutely terrifying. And I would love for you to just walk me through that time period, and we'll dissect it a little bit.
Yeah. So as a bit of context, during, and I think it's important background. So during the years that we were scaling really fast, right? 2020, 2021, all the growth, all the craze, et cetera. Candidly, I think looking back, one of the mistakes I made is that I was so focused on pipeline and growing revenue and hiring. And we were in an environment where companies were expanding so naturally, needing more licenses, that I kind of dropped the ball, frankly, on customer and products in terms of where my focus was. And in our, objectives that I set to really take on as much market as we could, we built a lot of features. And candidly, looking back, we launched a lot of them as kind of MVPs versus features that we were like, heck yes, we are really proud of this. And that caught up with us. That caught up with us from a product quality standpoint, right? It starts with little paper slices here and there, and some larger issues. And so January last year, we kind of came to a tipping point where like if you go back, like we had so much customer love and we still do, but like customers were like shouting and like they like the kind of excitement and stories that we were hearing was just amazing. And it started slowing down a bit. And we started having more conversations around like, well, we need this and we need this, and this isn't working quite as well as we'd like it to. And like, okay, you guys have a rich text editor, but we can't do tables. And so we're copying, pasting tables from other documents. Like there was just all these imperfections, right? And anyone that works in technology knows that one, that's a natural part of the evolution, right? You as you kind of build and build and build. But I think we'd gotten a bit distracted in that process with such a lens on growth versus really sticking to our first investor and board member, Brett, and a mentor of mine, what he calls protecting the kernel, right? Making sure that your core product, your core differentiation is really, really strong. And so that was kind of like leading up to a time where like, so we were starting to just have a lot more quality issues. This is January last year. And at the same time, my co-founder, Zari, who we started the company, 6 years ago, we had worked together previously. Her and I had a phenomenal partnership. She, unfortunately, over the 18 months leading up to that, went through a lot of really difficult personal times, loss, divorce, and other things. And so she was at the point where she was like, I need to take a step back because it's just no longer serving the company right now, because she just had gone through so much trauma. I've never seen someone in my life or heard of anyone in my life go through the kind of pain that she went through. And so she had to take a step back, which was really difficult back in May last year. And that was when I basically was now handed the responsibility to both go find a CTO to solve our problems, right at the same time as our economy started to crash. And so coming off of lots of growth, lots of success, lots of excitement. And so it was a really difficult period, right? We had to restructure the business to prepare for what we now know was going to be a difficult season ahead. And we were fortunate to have investors that, saw that coming and were able to really guide us through that process. But having to deal with that, plus now taking over a CTO and frankly, diving into the data and customers in the way that I used to in the first couple of years, but frankly hadn't as much in the year prior, and really recognizing like, wow, we have a lot more of these little imperfections and bugs than I'd realized. And so, and at that point, I didn't know what kind of CTO I needed, right? Because I wasn't clear on like what were our problems and what kind of, did I need someone that was like really brilliant architect type of CTO? Did I need someone that was really good at like building efficiency and engineering teams? Did I need someone that was more of like that innovator that was going to be able to bring in AI and ML and all the great things? And so, I didn't move on it immediately. I took a step back and I took the role of CTO, and we have teams in Pakistan as well in the US. And so I was flying back and forth and meeting with the teams, really trying to get clear on, where were we having challenges? Where were we not? I hit pause entirely on innovation, and I called it return to fundamentals. And we basically outlined a 12-month roadmap of here are all the key areas in our product that I wanted to get to a place where I wanted to get up on stage and brag about them. Partly because I saw AI coming as well. And I knew that, as you think about a platform like Spekit, and really any content platform is so ripe for AI. There is so much potential. But I didn't want to be one of those companies that just slapped AI on a shaky foundation. And so we really took a step back and we like rebuilt and refactored a lot of our core pieces, our search, right? Our editing and content experience, our organization, our architecture, our reporting, our analytics, like all the things that were going to be ultimately inputs into AI. And so now fast forward, we've turned the page on almost all that. And it's been amazing being able to get all that feedback from customers. And like now it's like our weekly active usage has gone up by over 30% just in the last 6 months, despite having, churned some licenses as well. So we're seeing a lot more usage and a lot more adoption. We had to reset a lot across the business. Even, and I know this isn't unique to us, but, when you're in growth mode, it's easy to not realize where you have gaps. And, I realized that we had gaps in a lot of places in the way that we were training our customers on the product, on how we were serving them on from a success standpoint. And so there was a lot of kind of resetting and taking a step back and getting the fundamentals right. And during that summer of kind of rejiggering and reorging and searching for the right CTO, I ultimately found it. And actually GTM Fund was the one that introduced me to Paul.
Woohoo!
And Paul, who's
Love that.
our head of our...
Swear I didn't mean to tee that one up, but
No, but it's true. And it's funny because he was the first person I talked to. You guys were one of the first funds that I said, hey, I'm going to start looking for this. I didn't even start the search yet. And so I talked to him at the very beginning. And I'm like, wait, pause. I need to like get clear on what I need. And he was in transition too. But we spent a few months, getting to know each other, getting to know the problem space. He had familiarity with it coming from Guru, at least in one of the lenses that we solve. And so now fast forward, like we are in a place that I'm very, 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 very proud of looking back. But it was definitely a very humbling experience in many facets, because as a first time founder and CEO, like, it's hard no matter what. It's just hard. But trying to do that through an economy that, I hadn't experienced prior, that many of our leaders, many of our teams hadn't. And so trying to show up for the team in a time of uncertainty when there's a lot of internal things that needed fixed, like there was just a lot of commotion and chaos. And so it was hard. There's definitely things looking back that I do differently, but it was a really great experience. And frankly, it was the best way for me to get like really deep on the engineering front and product and really understand our processes and our architecture and the domain, so that, ultimately, I think the role of the CEO is to ideally work more on the business and lead the strategy and lead the exec team and set goals. But the reality oftentimes is quite different, right? At the end of the day, I think my biggest role is to tackle our biggest problems. And so, by quarter, by sometimes multiple quarters, like I really focus my energy and attention in certain areas. And the first few years, originally a little bit more on the customer side, but I'd really been focusing on sales and marketing. I was so active on LinkedIn and we were seeing a ton of, demand, and I loved doing that. And I really became knowledgeable in areas like SEO and other things. But I hadn't gone that deep in R&D. And I think that now I feel a lot more confident in being able to have the kind of conversations that I need to be having with these seasoned executives that we've brought on to help solve those problems. So I think it's part of the natural process of being a CEO, but I think it's also just an invaluable learning experience to be able to actually hold that responsibility myself.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just going to make you an even better CEO and leader, having full, deep insight into all areas of the business, the R&D side. I think, a lot of CEOs and founders who are more GTM focused, they get more and more detached from the product over the years and get more attached to like the story, and they get really good at the story, but they can lose sight. So I think, on a whole, just the resilience you've shown and popped out the other side, and weekly active users up 33% is incredible. So congratulations. My question goes, before we go, like maybe what you would do differently, is I'm always curious, because I know we play an intense game, whether it's founding companies or VC. You have first your partners in a lot of pain, which I'm sure was super difficult. You have to take the reins as a CTO. The economy's breaking down. You are having to revamp a lot of your product. How did you personally make sure that you were able to mentally show up for your team? I imagine that was very, very difficult just from like a personal level.
It was difficult. And there's, looking back, things that I would do differently for sure. I think I would have taken more time to think, more time to strategize. I think, there's definitely at times where I was probably more reactive and emotional than I would have liked to. I don't have a great answer because it was just hard. It was just hard. I think what I would do differently is, one, really making the hard decisions faster as a business, and trusting my gut and instinct. I think looking back, the times that I waited on making certain decisions, the times where I saw yellow flags in the business and our data, and I was like, okay, I've got 10 red flags over here. Let me go focus over here first. That then became another red flag. So I think that I'd trust myself a little bit more, frankly, in the process. And and just make the hard decisions faster, especially when it comes to people at all levels in the business. Right. At the end of the day, I think a lot of teams hired quickly during 2021, and a lot of hiring practices that we now know are really, really important. We skip steps, and it's because, there was such competition to hire people that, people had great backgrounds, and they, and I think we've hired really well overall, but there were definitely people that, weren't the right fits. And partly it's because, they had worked primarily at large organizations, for example, and they were excited by the excitement of a startup. And for many years, if you were following Spekit, that was the only thing that you saw, right? And so you're excited by all the roses and ponies and the funding announcements and all that stuff. And that's actually why I've never shared our valuation with our team or publicly, because I don't want that to be something that people focus on, because frankly, the last 12 months have told us that it doesn't really mean anything. But I think we didn't. One thing that I'd go back from a hiring standpoint is really ask, like, why this product? Why this mission? Like, why are you so deeply passionate? Because that is what's important. I think at the end of the day, you need to have smart, capable, resilient people, but you need to have people that are really, really driven on this particular problem. And I think that in some cases that wasn't the case, and that became evident, when things got tougher, when those transitions happened, that some individuals, were just not the right fit. And I think in trying to make things work, especially at the IC level, right? You don't want to performance manage people out. You don't want to sometimes acknowledge just that, like, this person is great, but we're just not the right fit for them. And so I would just make the hard decisions faster, because when I make the hard decisions faster, I set the tone for our leaders too, for our managers too, and everyone else. And that isn't just applicable to hiring, but it's applicable to every part of the business. And I think there were so many decisions that had to be made. There were so many things that needed to be addressed that I delayed some of those. Our leaders delayed some of those, and those have consequences. So I think the biggest piece that I do is just trust my gut more, make the hard decisions and move on. And I'm not going to make the right decisions every time, nor have I, but I think that's important.
I think that's excellent advice for all the founders and leaders listening. Sometimes it is about speed, and you'll get 1 in 10 decisions wrong. But, even if you're making a lot of decisions, you're also getting more data and input to inform your next decision. So over time, you're going to start making more right decisions because you have more data to pull from. It's this interesting, like, a loop. And I actually love your initial answer where you said, I don't have a good answer. It was just fucking hard. And sometimes it's just fucking hard. And, and that's it. And I think a lot of us during peacetime, when everything was great for, the last almost decade in software, that we assumed like something was wrong and things were hard. And like, no, sometimes things are just hard, and you have to find a way to continue going. So,
and I really believe that you become a better company for it. You grow so much as individuals. And that's what we've had to encourage the team. Like, it is a harder selling environment. It is really, really, really hard to be in CS today, right? Everything is being scrutinized in ways that many individuals on our team had never been trained on how to. And we'd hired a lot of experienced people, but it was just different conditions in the environment. So you had to start from ground zero with some of these teams to really train them on, like, okay, how do you go talk to the CFO as a CSM and have those conversations? When prior to that, you had 5 levels below that were approving budgets. And so you were just developing great relationships with your champions, and that was fine. How do you multi-thread into accounts, right? So there was just so much training and change and fundamentals that were needed. And so but the ones that, really are committed and grow, like, it's just been a beautiful thing to watch over the last year, seeing just how some individuals have really, really grown just in ways that it's just awesome to watch. And ultimately I'm proud of,
makes us all better. All the growth and learning comes from the tough times, for sure. All right. I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to go to a listener question. And I like this one. It is, what is one piece of advice that you would give your 25-year-old self? And I think it's a perfect question because 25 is right when you were starting Spekit? That's like a cliche question, but this is like super perfect because that's like day one of Spekit. What do you tell Mel day one of Spekit?
You have no idea what you're getting into. That's probably
Run away.
No,
I'm just kidding.
I'd encourage her. I'd encourage her to do it. It's been the best experience of my life by far. I think the biggest piece is, and it's more of a life philosophy that I have. Kind of goes in line with like this too shall pass, but more so, I think life is meant to go through in kind of seasons or chapters, however you want to think about it, and there are going to be periods of time where like I think you can have it all but not all at once, and being really intentional about where is my personal time, what relationships, what parts of my life am I investing in alongside of Spekit, because at the end of the day, Spekit is my baby. When I started it, I didn't have even a partner. Like it was just like I was all in. Zari and I were two of us against the world, and we found amazing people. But it's hard as a 25-year-old to have to give up the majority of your social life, right? The not being able to show up for some important moments in life, weddings, you name it. And so just accepting that that's just part of life. And if you were really putting it all into something that's worth it, that you can make it all work, and you need to find that balance and integrate that. You just need a reminder every once in a while that like you can't do it all at once, and just to be intentional that like, oh, I've been neglecting my family for the last few months. Okay, I'm going to refocus my energy here because it's important. So I guess that's what I'd give myself, to not be so hard on myself when I feel the guilt of like, oh, I've been a terrible daughter and cousin and friend and partner and all the things at once that can kind of creep up.
I like the word grace these days. You got to give yourself grace. It's like you can't be everything to everyone. You can't do everything, especially if you want to do great things. It like there is a sacrifice. But again, you're totally right. It comes in seasons, and sometimes you sacrifice one season, and then another one you can really show up in a meaningful way. So I love that. Thanks for sharing. So final two questions, and I keep these always the same. They're pretty vague, so you can take them anywhere you want. First one is kind of a hot take. So what is one thing that founders believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
I'll say founders / like investors, sometimes team members, that, spending time on building your brand as a CEO is a complete waste of time when it comes to like press and stuff like that. And that it's a distraction, and like you should just focus on the business, and that's all that matters. And, I think there are definitely elements of truth to that. If you wanted to do a speaking tour of America and spend all your time there, it's very easy to get distracted. But I will say, the first few years, one, I had no network. I had no one to buy Spekit. Our first 40 customers, I sold myself. I got them myself going to conferences. Like I didn't have buddies that I could call a procurement at companies that could buy your software, which by the way, I definitely advise to any founder. Don't have your friends buy your software. Don't have people buy your software. Have complete strangers, so that you have strangers giving you the real deal, and you're not getting false positive feedback from, people that you like.
This is really good advice. Yeah, you can trick yourself into thinking you have product market fit. They're telling you the wrong, they're sugarcoating their feedback.
I am shocked that investors don't ask that more. How did you get these customers? Or ask customers, because I have had founders tell me, it's just like, oh yeah, well my buddies all bought the software. And I'm like, but that you won't get surprised. Like it's anyway. So that's one piece of advice. Have complete strangers, because that way you will be held to maximum accountability, and ultimately it'll give you the feedback that you need to get things right. But anyway, going back to the branding piece, in the last year and a half, if anyone used to follow me on LinkedIn or the Spekit journey, I was very active for the first years. And frankly, it's because it was a huge champ for us. We got a ton of pipeline that way. We got a ton of brand awareness. And it's a combination of thought leadership, et cetera. And frankly, posting on LinkedIn, like it's maybe an hour a week that you spend if you're sharing thoughts. The last year and a half, I literally just had zero time. I had no time. I didn't have the mental bandwidth to try and be inspirational, because I was just solving hard problems. And frankly, like I saw our pipeline drop. Like our pipeline inbound from that channel significantly dropped. And, I've talked to a few of our friends over at Catalyst and others where they've done a phenomenal job with their thought leadership, and like they're attributing a lot of their pipeline to it. And so I think it's more so just, yes, PR, all those things can be a distraction. I wouldn't spend a lot of time on PR, but I think building a brand, like people want to know the humans behind the brand. I really believe that, behind the products that you're building. And I think that the companies that do a really great job of that, almost all have that. Gainsight, Nick Mehta, right? Salesforce, Mike Benioff. And it's scary, frankly, like it's difficult being in the spotlight, because there are definitely people that will abuse that and will be hurtful towards you for some of those reasons, especially when things don't work out as well with certain employees. But at the end of the day, I think it's a risk worth taking, because it can really drive your business forward if you do it right. So I guess that would be my 2 cents.
It's great. And shout out Mark Costaglo leading some of that charge at Catalyst. I was talking to him yesterday, actually catching up with him.
I did too.
Some of that.
I did
Did
too.
you?
Very briefly. Yeah.
Nice.
Like I actually sent him a voice note, because he was one of those kind leaders last year when I was going through a lot of challenges that I reached out to, and he gave me a lot of advice. And he was on my mind recently. He's phenomenal. I just sent him a voice note. I was like, I just want to thank you for just being so kind last year. And we got talking, and now we've actually got some really cool stuff we're thinking through. So shout out to him.
Shout out. Yeah. Mark's the man. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Obviously we were super intentional around helping build Manny's brand at Outreach. And then we, took that learning and, had Anna build a brand, and it really moved the needle for us in a lot of meaningful ways. So absolutely agree. It is tough. It's a balancing act, but there is ways you can scale it, like put the resources that maybe you would put into traditional PR and put that behind your CEO and executive team. So
but make it about the brand, like make it about like the brand of the company, because if it's just talking about, whatever, like you can, it's important to, share what you feel like sharing, but at the end of the day, like be strategic with it, like make it a business intentional, process.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last question as we wrap up. What is one thing that's working right now that other founders can copy?
Honestly, right now it feels like our exec team is on fire. It feels really, really good. I think we've really increased product momentum and a lot, when you solve all the customer feedback with your product, you get a lot of that internal momentum. But it took time for us as an executive team. And the biggest piece was like, how do we work well together? And so I would just really recommend to any leader that's listening in right now, where it just feels like things are really, really hard and it's just hard to get done and there's constant misalignment, like spend time figuring out like, how do you work well as an executive team? And we haven't figured out, check the box. I think it's a constant process, but I think we've developed an environment where we are really comfortable challenging ourselves, in our executive meetings and really collaborating together. And it just makes a world of a difference because, and I'm not going to steal this. I was talking to the CPO, Chief People Officer of Zapier, just before this call, but he was talking about how they've been very intentional about that at Zapier. And he said, ultimately the problems that you don't solve at the executive level, what ends up happening is they're just really unintentionally delegated to people under the executive team that are much less qualified to handle them. And so, really getting clear on that, I think that is the best thing to be doing. And going back to the focus piece, right? Like we removed a lot of the noise and a lot of the distractions and all the little projects and initiatives that go to supporting. It's like an exponential multiplication that happens when you're like it's not just a project that you're taking on. It's like, oh, how are we going to market it? How are we going to, there's so many pieces go into it. And so we just said no to a lot of that by refocusing. And that gave us the breathing room while it was hard and had some consequences on pipeline as well to get the fundamentals right in order for us to be able to, really start expanding again, which we're starting to, which feels good.
That's great. I absolutely love that framing about decision makings at the executive level. It's like, and it kind of goes back to what you said. If you don't make those hard decisions fast, those decisions are going to be made. They're just pushed down. They're pushed down, and then someone else is going to attempt to half make the decision, and might not have the authority or the experience to be making it. That's awesome. Well, Mel, thank you so much for hanging out with me. It's always a blast to chat with you. I appreciate you. I appreciate your openness and your candidness. I always love when people share the hard parts of building companies and not just the good parts, because as we've learned over the last little bit, we all learn from the hard stuff much more than we do the shiny stuff. So thanks for being you. Thanks for jumping on. And I encourage everyone to go check out Spekit. It's an incredible tool. Everyone I know who uses it absolutely loves it. And for all our listeners, thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.